I'm Janine, and this is Outside the Box. Standing by to join me is Dido, Balla, Director of Educational Innovation and Partnerships at MindUP, the Goldie Hawn Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And since we last talked, my title actually changed, and the new title is Global Director of Training and Partnerships. So here we go.
Congrats. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
How did you first get involved with MindUP?
I got involved with MindUP around 2014, 15.
Okay.
When I was teaching. I was a high school teacher in Miami. And I was somebody who, as an educator, always wanted to explore the ways in which the brain works and wanted to design a classroom environment that could allow my students to feel as if they were in their own little world. And no matter what was happening outside of the classroom, they could just be kids who were 15, 16, and 17. And that was important for me because the kids that I taught, unfortunately, had so many responsibilities on their shoulders at such a young age that it was difficult for me to see in them kids. And so I was always exploring, and I wanted to make sure there was laughter in my class, there was joy in my class. And the more I used these practices in class, the more the culture changed in my class. And a friend of mine who was working for MindUP back then told me that what I did in my class looked or sounded like mindfulness, which I had never heard of before. And that's how he connected me to the foundation. That was my first introduction. And I became a trainer shortly after that. So I had my teaching job, and I was training for MindUP back then.
Fantastic. Now, you're not originally from this country. Where are you from?
I'm from Cameroon originally. So it is in West Africa.
And when did you come here?
I moved to the States in 2008. I moved to Washington State, and then I went to school there and graduated in 2011, which is when I moved to Florida, where I live now.
Okay. And what were things like for you growing up? Did you have a happy childhood? Were things great? Were they challenging?
Things were great because in my mind, I had a normal childhood. It's only when you step back and compare and go back and wonder why this or that was happening that you feel like maybe things were not great. But for me, things were challenging. Again, growing up in Cameroon, my parents were renting a small house by the time I was born, and where a big dream of theirs was to buy some land and build a house because it would save money that way. So after years of saving, my parents was able to buy a small plot of land in a new neighborhood, which there was nothing there, just nothing there before we moved. And unfortunately, we couldn't afford to finish building the house. So we moved into the house, not quite finished. We didn't have all windows or all doors yet. Okay. And we moved into the house and slowly finished as we were living in there because it was more economical. So no water, so I had to walk long distances to fetch water. We had electricity, but not always. But for me, that was normal. I thought that's what all kids around the world did.
Little did you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you feel like those built some resilience skills in you at an early age?
Oh, absolutely. Because when I think about my childhood and what I've been through in my life, right? So I'm 35, and I was born in Cameroon. I lived in Ethiopia, then in some in Nigeria, some in Benin, then in Ghana. So after all of that, living here, I mean, life is not easy or perfect, but I have experienced things that make me feel like I have some perspective. And so I am able to have a little more resilience and perspective taking, I think, thanks to those experiences.
Sure. I want to jump in and talk about the fact that before the pandemic, we were in a mental health crisis, and now we're in a mental health pandemic. And every day on LinkedIn, I'm seeing Mental Health America, as well as other organizations, post things on how students are doing, how adults are doing of all ages. How do you think we got to this mental health pandemic?
Well, it's an interesting question because the crisis was always there. And in fact, I am curious to know what the difference is between the mental health crisis and mental health pandemic. Because what I remember is that even back when I was in the classroom teaching and in 2011, 12, it was obvious to me that as a country and as a youth, we weren't okay. And so when I started working with MindUP and training teachers, it only confirmed that around the country, the youth was dealing with mental health issues, and they did not have the tools to regulate, to take care of themselves. And it was a little harder to convince adults then that this was important. So what I can say is that the pandemic forced the world to take a moment. Mm-hmm. And in a society where being on the go is valued, is appreciated, is encouraged. In fact, being busy is like a badge of honor sometimes, you think, right? And I think in a world where that's the norm, not being able to travel, offices closing, and just sitting at home with your own thoughts, with your own life, forced everybody else to realize that we haven't been okay for a long time. And as a result, more and more folks became open to exploring options to do something about it.
Sure. And I think about the millions and millions of people that lost jobs, the amount of anxiety and depression, suicide, fill in the blank, everything happened. And I feel like so many factors contributed to the mental health pandemic. And as you said, we were already in this mental health crisis. I don't think people realized, because they were just go, and people weren't focused. It wasn't really a priority. And one other thing I'm curious about is, you know, how we adopted STEM and STEAM, and that was embedded in the curriculum. I'm really hoping that mental health becomes a priority in the curriculum.
Yes, and I mean, that's one of our dreams. That's why at MindUP, we have a curriculum that's focused on neuroscience, mindful awareness, positive psychology, and social emotional learning. And it's a curriculum that's part of a way of life. So that means that not only do you have the tools and the contents to easily integrate these lessons in your everyday teaching as an educator, but really this is just the foundation that you need to hopefully shift your mindset throughout life in general and start to look at life with a perspective of, how does that affect my brain? How is it that I am going to be affected by the fact that in the morning when I wake up, I grab my cell phone and in 5 minutes, I download all the negative news that happened around the globe while I was asleep, right? Yeah. How is that affecting my brain? And how is that affecting my day? Because if I start my day that way, of course, when I'm driving to work and somebody cuts me off, I'm already angry. And then that exacerbates just your experience. And then add to that the collective trauma around just wars around the world, poverty. And then, of course, when you think about minoritized population, especially, they were already going through a lot of this even before the pandemic. Yes. It's just that now it's more of us. So it's interesting. So yes, we should make it part of teaching, but also as part of a new mindset to just look at the world through a lens of mental health. We can only benefit from that.
Yes. I think we have to shift our priorities. I know we have to shift our priorities, in that I know a lot of parents, they want their kids to do well and get into a great college. But long term, let's say they get in a great college, but their mental health is really low. What's going to happen when they go to college? They're not going to be able to function. They're probably going to crash. As you said, you're teaching these life skills that will carry through youth, adulthood, as they get older, as they face life's ups and downs. Those are really important life skills. And at the end, what really matters is your mental health.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things that we know. It's interesting that we often have knowledge that we don't take into account when making decisions. So it seems to me that the model that we have in our society when it comes to pushing kids to achieve is assuming that the more you achieve, the better school you go into, the higher your grades are. Somehow that's correlated to how happy and fulfilled you would be in life. But that's just not true. So the pressure to do the best that you can at school, a school designed to assign value based on grades, for example, and then students start to attach their inherent value to the grades they get. That's where you start already, right? You start thinking about yourself having low self-esteem because a D in math makes you feel like you are a D at life.
Yes.
And you are told that the only way to do well is to increase those grades or graduate from high school. So the kids who are doing that, you feel as if they're better than you. So already it decreases. And then somehow you feel as if once you graduate, then something great will happen. But then as soon as you graduate, you realize that college is just the beginning of more stress. And then you are told that somehow if you do well in college or go to the best college and then graduate, then you will get to some sort of happiness or fulfillment. And then you get to college, you finish it, then you realize that finding a job is very difficult. Then you find the first job and you're not happy and you still have this mindset of, I'm going to go there. And when I get there. But the truth is, what you need to do is work on yourself right now today as you are from within. Mm-hmm. If your mental health is not okay, everything that you experience is viewed through the lens of that person who has low self-esteem, who has not gotten in touch with their emotions, how to self-regulate, who doesn't know exactly what makes them come alive, sure, who are just following a path created by other people. And unfortunately, I get to meet those kids when they're adults, and they tell me exactly that they were on a rat race. They thought that they would find fulfillment and happiness and health when they achieved XYZ. But of course, now we all know that the younger you can start like looking into yourself and getting in touch with your mental health and learning how to understand yourself, how to regulate yourself, how to seek help, the better you are going to be at achieving all those other things that parents and educators care about.
Exactly.
Anyway.
I know, because at the end of the day, I tell students when I give talks, you might not be doing well right now academically. That is not going to predict your future. And they kind of look at me like, really? I mean, that's probably not the message they're hearing, but it's not going to predict their future. I mean, I had moments of horrible grades, such bad SAT scores I would never tell my friends. And it really was not a prediction of anything. And it really bothered my self-esteem. It really did for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why unfortunately or fortunately, I put it all on the adults. Because if kids believe that their worth is attached to grades, it's because along the way, enough adults created an environment around them where they were getting attention and validation only when they performed to a certain degree based on grades. Yes. So I am not shocked that those students are surprised. So we just need more adults to share this message. And one more thing about the pandemic, when school stopped, and we had to redesign, re-understand, reimagine school virtually or a hybrid model. Many states, for example, cancel the standardized exams that kids take to graduate.
I saw that.
Many schools said, look, grades don't really matter right now. So that's very interesting. So if the pandemic allowed them to say that, why is it that it took a pandemic to say that, first of all?
Exactly.
Second of all, since if you remove the grades, then the question is, what do we do with our time? What are we teaching? And I think it's the perfect opportunity. I've been saying that for 2 years, to teach kids to understand themselves, to teach emotional intelligence, and to make sure that since nobody controls the things that happen to us, at least we can work on controlling what we do with our inside so that our better version can show up, our best version can show up to face whatever we don't control, such as a pandemic.
Yes. I want to add something to what you just said, because I believe we also have to rethink assessing students' knowledge. So let's say, for instance, someone's a bad test taker, as was I. I finally got the courage to say to my teacher, can I do something else? And I think there's been so much stress with students, giving students an opportunity to show their knowledge and skills in another method is really powerful, and it builds self-esteem. Like, for instance, I'm a visual learner. So for me, if I'm going to research somebody and do a poster board and give a little presentation, that is more powerful than me cramming for a test and stressing. I'd much rather do the research project. And I feel that if teachers have the flexibility to do that, because they've had an enormous amount of pressure, that's an understatement. What they had to face, March 2020, was unbelievable, and a lot left the profession. But if they're given the option to introduce other methods, I think that would be very powerful.
Absolutely. And you have to ask the question, what exactly am I assessing and why am I assessing it? So for instance, so my wife is a teacher, and she had a student who was very stressed because of end of the school year, anxiety in general, and having many classes where he wasn't doing too well. So as the school year is ending, he owes her an essay where he's supposed to argue something. I forget what it was, but she knows he's a good writer because after a year together, she's seen lots of writing samples. Currently, he's not able to write that essay because of everything that's happening around his life. Now, she had to ask herself, what exactly am I assessing? He has not written the essay, but giving him a 0 for that, that says that he doesn't know how to write, doesn't make any sense. I know he's a good writer.
Yes.
1. And 2, the points he's supposed to make or the analysis he's supposed to make in writing, I know he can make it. So it doesn't make sense to give him a 0. So once you realize that he just didn't have the time and he was too stressed to sit down and write the essay, she asked him to come in person and say she would give him the chance to talk about it.
It's great.
Somebody else may say, but that's not fair. That's not what the assignment was. But she knows he's a good writer. She has evidence throughout the year. Mm-hmm. She knows how to analyze text, and she will get him to do it, except it's speaking. That removes so much anxiety from this poor kid, and he can demonstrate the same level of understanding that he would have with the writing assignment. So I totally agree with you.
Well, bravo to your wife, because she gave him another opportunity. I mean, I remember reading this great book. I think it's The 7 Different Types of Intelligences. And it really resonated with me in grad school because I thought, oh, I'm not a math person, but I'm a music person. I'm not this person, but I do kind of fit into that category. And so you don't have to stick with what people say you need to do, But I think that's a great strategy she did. Fantastic.
Yeah, I want more educators to be encouraged to do this. But again, the same way I say that what's the kids' mindset right now was created by adults, the teacher's mindset right now was created by the system under which they work. So it's not really up to the individual teacher. My wife is lucky that, one, she thinks this way and works at a school where she was able to do this. Right. However, I know for a fact from experience that there are schools where if you did that as a teacher, you would get in trouble. So that's why, in addition to encouraging teachers to be creative, innovative, they need support from those who are above them as well.
Yes. Well, what you're really also talking about is compassion, kindness, empathy, because no one really knows what a student is going through. If they're a rock star A student, and then they start coming to school after they're remote, and suddenly they look thin and they're not communicating and they're not doing their assignments, maybe there's not enough food on the table. Maybe there's something else going on at home. So as teachers, I believe, obviously they have so much on their plate, but if they can try to be a detective and kind of engage and figure out what's going on, they might help that student.
Yeah, it goes into one of the pillars of MindUP is social and emotional learning, which is essentially the science of understanding, having self-awareness, awareness of your emotions, who you are, and then learning how to manage those emotions, and then also learning how to have a social awareness and making good decisions and building strong relationships, etc. One way to think about that is you need to learn how to view people holistically, not based on their title. And when I say title, I mean that when you are an English teacher and you have a student, it's not really, you don't want to think about them as a student who's here to learn how to write essays.
Right.
They're a whole human being. And if you think about them as a holistic person, then you think about them within your class, outside your class before they get to your class, and outside your class after your class. Then you realize that something as simple as the ride to school, something may happen there that definitely impact their brains in a way where when they show up in your class, they can't be ready to jump into learning, for example, or the anxiety over what they might be anticipating going into or getting into after your class might make it so that the last few minutes of your class, they aren't as engaged. So yes, be a detective, but you will not always be able to actually get the answer right away. Just assume,
yes,
like this, assume good intent. People do the best they know how, especially kids. There aren't many kids out there who are intentionally planning the ways in which they are going to be mean to teachers or be disrespectful. Assume that it comes from something that happened to them the minute, the hour, the day, the month before the actual interaction. Yes. Even if you don't know exactly what happened, if you assume that, you show up with more compassion, more empathy.
You said something really important, which was if a teacher is allowed to kind of go out of that box. So to me, it comes down to a policy change. So it's obviously not up to the teacher, but if we're going to integrate mental health and wellness, we have to also think differently in giving teachers leeway to be more creative.
Absolutely. So there are a few steps that need to be followed. You need to have a change in policy, but then you need to follow with training and support. Because what I've also observed is that sometimes there can be a policy that says you should care about kids' mental health. Well, that's a good first step, but how do you do that?
Right. What does that mean?
What exactly does that mean? So change the policy, but then don't be afraid to look into something new. Change the way you train teachers. In fact, I believe that teachers' academies or masters of education, that's where it should start. Like anybody who goes to school to become a teacher, even at that level, the higher education, they should also change their policies and their programs so that those teachers come out of school having learned these tools already. So there are so many things that need to happen, but it definitely includes the individual teachers in general as a whole in the profession, how we prepare teachers, school leaders and administrators, policies, etc.
Yes. Yeah. I went to Syracuse University and I studied instructional design, and I got my master's. And I remember learning about intrinsic motivation and the ARCS model. I think John Keller was the name of this person. And I will never forget this because ARCS stands for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. The 4 things that you should put into a presentation. Let's say you're giving a presentation on something. Well, you can get their attention by being funny, making it interesting, making it relevant, things like that. The point is, it's so important to think about these models when designing education.
It is. And when I think about intrinsic motivation, I think about a few anecdotes or interactions I've had with adults where a teacher may tell me about a specific student. No, you don't understand. This kid has no motivation. I'm like, well, it's interesting because if you are a science teacher or a math teacher or an English teacher, it may appear that they don't have any motivation in a particular task in your class. But this is the same kid who, when their video game is broken and they want to play with their friends, they will get on YouTube, watch hours of tutorials, fix their own Xbox.
Right.
So I'm struggling to understand how this is the same kid who has no motivation. It's just not true. It's that we need to learn how to tap into that motivation. So I love what the model that you shared. One model that I've adopted over the past maybe 7 years is thinking about ABCs. Think about A for autonomy, B for belonging, and then C for competency or competence. If you want to tap into somebody's intrinsic motivation, create an environment where, yes, you are the educator and you are in charge, but create a sense of autonomy. Like we talked about the student who might want to sing a song to express what they learned, as opposed to write an essay. A sense of autonomy, give them options so they can choose. 2, belonging, make them feel as if they are part of a community. The classroom, just like a football team, a soccer team, they are a community. They have inside jokes. They have a common language that only they understand. And then, of course, you need to be competent, right? So just because if you have autonomy and you feel belonging and it's math, but you don't have any competence in math, then that's not even going to work out. So those 3 things together are important. But it seems to me education tends to focus on only being competent in the subject and doesn't spend as much time overall on belonging and autonomy.
Yes. I can give you an example. When my daughter was, let's see, I would say 9th or 10th grade, she was taking a science class, chemistry, I believe. She was having a hard time. And I said, go to the teacher and see if you can come up with a different idea for your project. So he asked her, well, what do you like to do? She says, I like to make slime. And she actually had a slime business where she would make it and sell it. And then she had a business. She had this whole event where 1,200 people came. They were 16 at the time. But the point is, she gave a presentation on the chemistry of slime, and she didn't like public speaking. And what happened? She was so charismatic. He could see who she really was. And she didn't stop to think about, am I nervous? Am I this or that? She just had the best time. And she got an A just for being herself.
There you go. And I have to give a shout out to that teacher, because there is something about the environment that they created, which is something that you and I didn't talk about, but we need to talk about the importance of creating a safe environment in class where it's okay to be yourself. It's okay to make mistakes, because as adults, you and I both know mistakes is the way to learn.
Oh, yes.
You learn by making mistakes. So if you have a classroom culture or environment where the students feel as if they make a mistake, they're in trouble. If they aren't perfect, they are in trouble. It'll be a lot difficult. So shout out to that teacher, because he made her feel like it was okay to be herself and it was okay to not be perfect.
Definitely. Shout out to Mr. Ben. I'm going to have him as a guest on my show. He's phenomenal.
You're the one, Mr. Ben. Shout out to you.
Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I just want to say that everybody's going through it. Nobody's okay. The kids aren't okay. The teachers are not okay. The school leaders are not okay. Nobody is. So everything I've said so far has nothing to do with individuals. Every single individual is going through it. Forget about your title. If you're a teacher or superintendent, you're all going through it as well. System has to change though. And I am hoping that more and more individuals, since individuals make the system, can look into the past couple of years and not strive to go back to normal, if normal is pre-pandemic, but take those lessons that we've learned and move forward with that mindset that emotional intelligence is extremely important. Mental health, wellness, well-being, those are things that if we focus on, not only are we going to have healthier human beings, but we're going to have higher achievers anyway. So all the things you care about will also be taken care of, but start with mental health.
Definitely. And by the way, that normal wasn't so healthy.
No, obviously not. It was not.
And I wouldn't want to go back.
There you go.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you for having me.